This happened when I went to my high school prom. It was almost 10 years ago now, and was my first time going to prom. My school was pretty large, with about 2,000 students total, so about 500 in each grade. I did not have a date, but instead went with a few of my friends. We had planned it for a while, and we were looking forward to it. When the day came, we did most of the usual prom things. We got dressed, took some pictures, went to the high school and had more pictures taken, talked with classmates, and then went to the venue that our prom was being held at. It was really nice and only about 5 minutes away. There was a dance there and dinner. All of these events were very normal, and my friends and I had a great time. The real story starts after all of this, though. Prom went on sort of late into the night, but one of our classmates was having a party at her parents' house. Her parents just happened to be out of town for the weekend, which was the perfect storm. I won't mention the classmate's name, but her house was really nice, and the house was also a little bit more out from the city. This meant they had a bigger yard, and the party at the house would be less noticeable to neighbors. It was kind of by my house, as a matter of fact. The word of the party had been spreading throughout the school week leading up to prom. There was probably a good 50 people that I knew would be going. When people started to leave from prom, my friend and I went to the house where the party was. When we got there, there was already a good number of cars parked in the driveway, as well as on the side of the street. I got a ride with 4 of my friends, and we went inside. Music was playing very loudly, and we saw a bunch of our school friends. There were people in some other grades there as well. As time went on, it got more and more busy, and the music and overall noise got louder and louder. By the time it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning, things seemed to reach the peak. The house was filled with people, some of which I didn't even know. Then I heard some people shouting and running everywhere. I didn't know what was going on at first, until I happened to glance out the front window and see what appeared to be a police car parking in front of the driveway. I saw a bunch of people going upstairs, but my friends went out the back door. The backyard was hidden from the front of the house pretty well, so a few more kids went back there as well. Looking back, I probably should have just stayed, because I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I decided to go home. I could get to my house by going through the backyard to a connecting street, and then walking down that street for about 5 minutes until it connected to mine. When I got out the back door, I ran for the back of the yard. Like I said, the property had a sort of big yard. There was probably about 2 acres total just in the backyard alone, and there was a small woods taking up the last 50 feet or so until the street behind it. By the time me and several other kids reached the woods, things got very dark. I had lost contact with my friends and could no longer see them. Everybody seemed to go in different directions than me for some reason. I walked around the woods a little, but soon stopped hearing noises at all and realized that I was now all by myself. Everybody had seemed to want to go to the connecting street that was to the left, and I was going to the right. By the time I reached the street that I needed to walk down, things were eerily quiet. There were no streetlights here either, and suddenly I felt a little spooked. I walked at a fast pace to try to make it home. Then I heard some footsteps from behind me. I expected it to be one of my classmates, but I looked back and saw some guy who was a grown adult. I had never seen him before. When I saw him, I turned and kept walking, but then realizing how strange it was, I looked back again. He was no longer there. Things were really dark, but it seemed as though he had probably gone into the woods. I walked even faster down the road. I took out my phone to text one of my friends or see where they were, but I saw that my battery was at like 3%, and I put it back. As I kept walking, I got a strange feeling and then looked behind me again. The man was back. I didn't know what else to do but to just keep walking. After about another minute, I looked back and the guy was gone again. I continued home, and within another 10 minutes, I had finally made it. I got inside and everybody else was asleep. When I was back inside though, I looked out the front window. I saw the same guy sort of walking through our front yard. He was walking very slowly and then disappeared behind a large tree. I wasn't sure what to do. I plugged in my phone and texted my friends. They had all made it back to their houses. After texting them, I went back over and looked out the window again, and I saw the guy. He walked out from behind the tree, paced around a little, and then went back behind it. At this point, it was super late and I was really tired. I didn't want to wake anybody up, and I just went to sleep. The next day when I got up, everything was fine. I never saw the guy again, and I don't know what happened to him. Over time, it creeped me out more and more to think about it. Who could that have been, and what was he doing? "4 years ago was my senior year of high school. I'm a female, and by the time the spring came around, everybody was starting to talk about the prom. It was coming up fast, and people were starting to ask each other to go. And although I did not have a boyfriend, I had a pretty good idea of who I would be going with. It was a guy named Pete, and he was on the football team, and we were sort of in the same friend group. We had been pretty good friends for a while, and briefly talked about going with each other. Still, he said he was going to surprise me when asking. The problem came when something else happened. There was this one guy in our grade named James. I had nothing against James, and had only very briefly spoken to him in classes a couple of times. However, he had a reputation of being a bit of a creep. Overall, he had been suspended from school a few times for various reasons, and most notably for being involved in a fight the previous year. I didn't have any classes with him at the time, but one day he approached me in the hallway kind of randomly. He asked me if I would go to prom with him. It was really awkward. I felt badly, but I had to tell him no. He didn't make a sign or anything. He just came up and asked me when I was at my locker. This made it a little bit less weird because nobody else was really looking, but still, it's awkward to turn something like that down. I told him that I was expecting somebody else to ask me, and we had sort of agreed to go with each other a while ago. James questioned if this was true, and I told him that it was. He just sort of walked away after that. I felt bad, but I knew that I did the right thing. Not long after that, I was asked by Pete. Over the next few weeks leading up to the prom, I didn't see James at all. Then came prom night. When Pete and I got to the school prom, we met with our friends and took countless photos. As the night went on, I was having a lot of fun and was very busy talking with people and whatnot. At one point though, I saw that James was there. He was just sort of standing in the corner and did not appear to be with anybody at all. Plus, he wasn't dressed up. He was just wearing a sweatshirt and jeans. I looked at him for maybe 2 seconds. When I did, he looked over at me. How awkward is this, I thought. I gave him a slight smile and then looked away. For the rest of the night, I tried to avoid James, but I did see him a couple of more times. Each time, he was sort of creeping in corners. When the prom was coming to a close and everybody started to leave, Pete and I went into the parking lot with some friends. Pete was going to drive me home, and after saying bye to some friends, I got in the passenger side of his car. The driver's door opened, which I expected to be Pete, but it wasn't. It was James getting in the driver's seat of Pete's car, and I noticed that James had the keys in his hands. He slammed the door shut and locked it, and a couple of seconds later, I saw Pete arrive at the driver's door and try opening it. When it wouldn't open, he started banging on the door, and that's when James started to drive away. He slammed on the gas, and the car sped out of the parking lot recklessly. I was sure that we were going to hit something, but we didn't. I asked James what on earth he was doing. James started mumbling some stuff, but I couldn't really make it out. I told James if he didn't stop the car and let me out, I was going to call the police. I got out my phone after saying it. James responded by saying that he didn't care. He was speeding down one street after another. I dialed 911, and as soon as somebody answered, I started talking, explaining the situation. When James heard this, he reached over and tried to grab my phone. There was a slight struggle, and the car swerved a little. James was able to get my phone away from me, though, and he ended the call after maybe 20 total seconds. James continued to drive down streets at high rates of speed. It was the most terrifying car ride I've ever been in by far. After about 10 more minutes, finally, I saw some flashing lights behind us. James did not pull over for a moment and kept driving, but after maybe 30 seconds, he stopped. As soon as the car stopped, I opened my door and ran out. I was just happy to be out of that car with him. Thankfully, the car didn't have any damage on it either, and it was returned to Pete. I found out afterwards that James actually punched Pete and grabbed his keys when he was walking to his car. It was a wild prom night, but I luckily never saw James again after that. I'm a male, and this happened years ago when I went to my high school prom. My date for the prom was a girl named Bree. Our date to prom had been kind of set up by our mutual friends. To be honest, we didn't really know each other all that well. We did have a lot of the same friends though, and when they saw how neither of us had a date, they encouraged us to go together. It was a good idea because we got along well. We didn't end up dating or anything like that afterwards, but we were able to have a fun night at prom. In fact, we're still friends to this day. The prom itself went really well. I was afraid that it might be a little bit awkward, but it wasn't at all. Bree and I talked with each other and our friends quite a bit too. At the end of the prom, I was going to drive home and drop Bree off at her house first. We left, and it would take maybe 10 minutes to get to Bree's house. I remember pulling onto the street, and a car that had been parked on the side of the street turned on and then started driving behind me. It was pretty late at night, and there weren't many other cars out, so I noticed this one in particular. It stayed behind me for more than half the drive to Bree's house, and we had to take several turns. We started wondering who was in the car and if they were following us for some reason. None of us recognized it. Eventually, I made it to Bree's house. When I got on her street, the car was still behind us. I pulled over at Bree's house and dropped her off. When I did, the car was a ways behind me, and it also stopped as well. I stayed parked until Bree got inside of her house, and the car behind me stayed parked as well. Then I kept driving forward, and the car started driving too. I had to turn around and pulled into someone's driveway to do so. I watched the car keep driving down the street, and for a moment I was relieved to see this. But not long after, the car turned around in somebody's driveway. I thought that it was going to keep following me home, but I noticed the car pull over on the side of the road not too far away from Bree's house. I kept driving and made it off of Bree's street without being followed. However, I was now a little bit concerned for Bree. I decided to pull over and text her, letting her know that the car had stopped on her street not too far away from her house. After I did, I decided that I should turn around and see if the car was still there. I felt sort of responsible for being the one who was driving. When I made it back to her street and reached Bree's house, I saw that the car was still there, parked where it had been. But when I pulled near it, I saw a man was outside of it. It was just some grown man who I didn't recognize. It seemed as though he was starting to walk into Bree's front yard or side yard. As soon as I saw him, he quickly turned and went back inside of his car, going in the passenger side door. He then slid over into the driver's seat, and the car started up. Then it sped past me and off the street. I let Bree know of this, and to be aware in case he came back. Then I drove home. Luckily, I wasn't followed or anything. After that, I never heard of the man coming back.